Hello, Andrew Reinhard.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. It's actually really quite exciting to be talking to you today because you seem to be interested in merging two passions, which I am extremely passionate about, and that is, I suppose, gaming, broadly speaking, and archaeology.
Yep.
You seem to be quite interested in these topics. You have, broadly speaking, identified yourself as a punk archaeologist. So could you possibly just introduce yourself and what on earth is punk archaeology?
Sure. Punk archaeology. This was a neologism created by Bill Caraher and Kostis Karelis, both of whom are archaeological professors, back in 2008. And they've been blogging about this for a long time, and kind of brought me into the fold, as we were working on some earlier projects. My colleague Aaron Barth at the University of North Dakota and North Dakota State University once pegged me as a punk archaeologist without borders, and it kind of stuck because I'm interested in all kinds of archaeology from all periods, from all times, all eras basically, and it doesn't matter to me, whether I'm in Greece doing an excavation or whether I'm, advising on the archaeology of North Dakota and the Badlands, or doing archaeology in video games. I don't care. It's all one and the same thing for me. We're all about history, and we're all about doing archaeology in these different environments. I can't make up my mind. I'm a generalist, and this gives me the full the full plate, as it were, of exploring what really interests me. The other thing about punk archaeology is a history of punk itself, and taking a look at material culture, that was left behind, by punk culture, punk musicians, punk artists, and taking a look at everything from handbills to old venues where they used to play shows, to basements where they used to play, to squatter houses and the like. And so, having that interest, but then also, taking a look at some other kinds of weird things. Punk archaeology is really also about archaeology at the margins. Whether it's cultures at the margins or things that your typical kind of archaeologist isn't going to really take a look at because they're specializing in things, like Greece and Rome, for example, which is something that I still do, but I'm not against taking a look at these other things because they're really interesting to me, and perhaps more so now than they ever have been.
Okay. Well, I have to say it's interesting. Whenever an archaeologist dares say, well, Greece and Rome isn't for me, they immediately have to say Greece and Rome is cool. Don't get me wrong. it's like we can't quite allow ourselves not to acknowledge the awesomeness of Rome. But actually, in that sense, were you particularly interested then? Was it a couple of years ago when was it some graffiti by, was it the Sex Pistols, I think, was found on a wall, and people were saying, this is some sort of punk Pompeii. I mean, is that the kind of thing that intrigues you?
Oh yeah, well, punk's a universal. I mean, there's always going to be somebody making trouble somewhere at some point in time, fighting against the establishment, railing against the government, and even like well, Socrates was a punk, and he got busted for it, and he ultimately died for for what he believed in, and quote unquote corrupting the youth. Nothing's changed, and so when we find these kind of punk elements in antiquity, that really resonates with us now because we get it. We still see it today, and it's just cool that people thought pretty much the same way they think now about stuff. It's just we have different technology in this case.
Okay. So, putting, I suppose, the more generally orthodox elements of your work to one side, I'm personally really intrigued by this archaeogaming, because you've got a blog, the Archaeogamer, is it, or Archaeogaming?
Archeogaming.com.
That's the one. Yeah. So go and visit, and it's really intrigued me because I have to say, when I first saw it, I'm not going to lie, I was like, whatever, because sort of thing. It's just someone playing computer games and drawing what some fairly, at best, surface level conclusions about cyberspace and this kind of thing. But actually, the more I've read and the more I've thought about this, and also actually talked about it with colleagues, the more intriguing the possibilities become. Now, can you, for the boys and girls out there, explain what is the value of archaeology of computer games?
Okay. With with Archeogaming, we're really looking at a couple of things here. It's the intersection of archaeology and computer games, as you've said, and that really has a lot of meanings. And on the surface level, you can look at it as like we did with the Atari excavation, where here's some artifacts, and they're artifacts to us because they're part of my material culture, my cultural heritage, and somebody buried them, and so. We're going out and we're looking at the physical evidence. We're seeing, okay, here's plastic and metal. It's been buried underground. It has a story that gives it this kind of history. What does that mean for understanding economics? What does that mean for understanding how we treat our entertainment? And we're looking at consumer culture and things like that, which is cool. And we're looking at video games, as people used to look at, say, papyrus rolls, that were found. And yeah, I'm going to go on a limb here and saying that this kind of material evidence that we're finding, for video games is not unlike finding the Dead Sea Scrolls. You heard it. You heard it first.
Well, okay. I mean, tell you what. Let's focus on that for a moment. Then we'll come back to virtual spaces in a moment. Then, last time, as I was just saying to you before we started recording, last time I saw your face, as pretty as it is, I saw it on the on the Atari Game Over documentary film, and what was really interesting there was, I think partly the tone of the film was clearly dictated by the person who wrote it. In many ways, his approach to talking about equipment and all this kind of stuff, that was funny, inverted commas. But what I found really actually intriguing about it, sorry, I'm British, we do sarcasm better than him. But no, sorry. So what was intriguing about it was actually the way that you weren't mucking about, in so much as there's the temptation to think that digging up a rubbish dump in New Mexico, what is there? What sort of stratigraphy is there? But actually, you were in fact using stratigraphic method. You were using the terminology such as surface spines and this kind of thing. But how? Because clearly you're dealing with a resolution there, which is a rarity for most archaeologists. How was that? Because obviously you could get a newspaper date. I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, we really talked our way into the project as archaeologists because we felt that if they're doing an excavation and they're doing archaeology or doing a dig of the recent past and this kind of stuff, that we really needed to treat these things in an archaeological way. I mean, we're looking at archaeology of the future in this case because the more people dig of us right now, the more they're going to find these boxes with wires and whatnot. They're going to want to understand what this is and how it was used and all of this stuff. Archaeologists don't really get a chance to dig in landfills all that often, and so that kind of field work was really appealing to us, to go in and to be a part of this. Being filmed was really kind of on the back burner for us. We didn't care, we were there to treat this thing, very earnestly and very seriously, and so, all of us had dug in the old world. All of us have experience digging in Greece, for example, working with loads of pottery, working with complex stratigraphy, and all of us had also had experience digging in the new world too. So whether we're in Missouri or Kansas, North Dakota, and in this case New Mexico, being able to apply archaeological method and an archaeological eye to the stratigraphy of a landfill, and also to understand what happens to trash that's been buried in a desert environment, 30 feet down or 10 meters down, was really incredible to us, and to have this kind of textbook parfait stratigraphy, dirt, trash, dirt, trash, dirt, trash. And then all of a sudden, as we're going, we're seeing things with dates. We're looking at vessels, that are giving us, kind of like a pottery typography. Here's a Pepsi bottle. And because of the label and the shape and the material, we know that we're getting into the mid-1980s right now, so that was really cool. And then finally, to like, every archaeologist is looking for like an inscription evidence, saying this was buried here by so-and-so on this date. Nobody finds that. And what do we find? We find a newspaper that has exactly that. Atari dump happened, in this date, and there it is on the Alamogordo Daily News right in front of us, and underneath the newspaper, games. Oh my God,
Wow.
that never happens. So we got really lucky, to have that kind of stratigraphy, to have that kind of evidence, and then all of a sudden to get this one enormous deposit of Atari games that we could then start to look at and start to try to draw conclusions on.
So that's quite literally the equivalent of having a Roman coin from say 300 AD just about some pottery from 200 AD. It gives you a wonderful date and stratigraphy there.
It's a secure date. It's a secure context.
Wonderful.
You can't ask for better than that.
No, absolutely. And I suppose in that sense, again, what I find fascinating, obviously, on the one hand, as someone who loves my computer games, I found the documentary interesting because of the whole crash in terms of the computer game industry. But also, what I found really interesting from an archaeological standpoint was that element of actually the ability to have that resolution in a rubbish dump, because it's the sort of thing which dissipates over time. I imagine if you could dig, say, a Roman fort 30 years after it had been abandoned, you'd get that, wouldn't you? You'd get that sort of micro stratigraphy. Absolutely wonderful, really, really interesting. Okay, well, back to then the big question that you sort of skillfully slightly avoided. What is the merit of I suppose of archaeology in that sort of gaming space?
I see this ways. I mean, as an archaeologist, we can go in and play, we can role play, I play RPGs, I play MMOs, and you can certainly role play as an archaeologist, mucking about and saying, oh, look at this thing over here, isn't this neat? And that's part of it, in a way. But then you start getting into deeper levels. I mean, you're looking at archaeological reception. How do gamers and developers interpret what archaeologists are? What do we do? What qualifies as an artifact? Why do we loot all the time? So we start looking at ethical questions there. And then you also start kind of looking at the game itself, playing in a particular world and understanding, how the world was constructed. And you start asking these kinds of questions that you ask of, archaeological sites and what I call meat space. We have virtual space and we have meat space, and we currently live in both. You and me, we walk around in meat space, and then we play games. We go into virtual space, and there we are. So I'm asking the same questions of, say, a culture, like looking at the race of Nords in Skyrim, for example. And by the way, on your tweet today, you had the image of the septum coin in the real world that had been generated from something in the virtual world, which is just terrific. And I'm so glad that you have it. And there it is. It's amazing. So it interests me also, that we have this kind of material culture of the immaterial space, right? Where you're looking at these things and they're starting to manifest themselves in the real world. And people are doing experimental archaeology by taking recipes, from Elder Scrolls and then making them in the real world to see how they taste and finding equivalent ingredients and stuff. That's no different than like Dogfish Head Brewery, working with Patrick McGovern at University of Pennsylvania to create the beer Midas Touch, which is based on an ancient recipe which is found in Gordion in Turkey, right? And so, we're doing the same things, asking the same kinds of questions, and I think where people really kind of flip out is the fact that they're seeing real culture as being different from cultures in a virtual space, when in fact both are man-made. Both are human constructs. It just so happens that they're bricks and mortar and things that we can touch in the real world with our hands, where we can't necessarily do this, at least yet, within a virtual space. And so that's one. Yeah.
So I'll bring you on to that point in just a moment, actually. But
sure.
Just coming briefly back to things like, for example, the septim coin coming out essentially of that space into a real space. Me and my colleague at ArchaeoSoup Live we're huge Skyrim fans, and not that long ago I actually did a video on ArchaeoSoup using the city of Whiterun to talk about phenomenology and talk about, as you approach the main gate, what the impression they want to give you is, but the fact that actually you can just walk over the rampart very easily from just behind the gate, and that in that sense it's very much like an Iron Age hill fort, and so it's good as a teaching space, and it's also good, as you say, to ask these sort of questions. But as you say, you sort of find yourself asking questions on two levels, because on the one hand they've constructed in a very short space of time, relatively, a whole story, a backstory as it were, and they've actually populated this world with archaeological remnants and modern things which are in fact in the process of decaying. But this is where we come to that question, and that is, we know that people designed that stuff. So, for example, I have here a lovely art book by
Yes.
the programmers and the artists who design the world. And in that sense, is there not a limit to the questions that you can ask when you can go and ask three people who actually design the whole world or something?
Yeah, I mean, that's the luxury of living in a contemporary time where you can still ask these questions of people who are likely still alive. But that's not to say that when we go and do an excavation. My colleagues are up doing the Man Camp project in the Bakken oil fields right now, looking at settlement patterns of migrant workers who are following oil money and doing the work up there. They can actually talk to these folks and ask the questions. Why did you choose to put your trailer here? Why do you have boards around your trailer? Is it for the winter? Is it to keep rodents out? And they can get this kind of information. I mean, as archaeologists, we would love to be able to go and ask, people who created, temples or houses or forts or whatever, to say, why did you do this? Because that's the question. I mean, that's why we're doing the work anyways, to figure out why and also how and when and how much and all of this stuff. It just so happens that we're doing this in the modern times, with modern people.
But I suppose, and it's a fairly reasonable question, I guess, is that.
Yeah.
It's to try and, I mean, what intrigues me, and the thing is, I have an answer for this, but I really want to hear your answer on this. What intrigues me is, what is the difference between, and what is therefore the validity of, looking at a space which has been artistically designed, for example, Skyrim, to look cool, and a space which is actually, for example, in the real world, which has actually come about through negotiation of geopolitical pressures and environmental pressures and all the rest of it. There are very different pressures in a computer game world compared to a real world.
Yeah, which I think that needs to be taken on its own merit. I think apart from whatever questions we're asking in the real world as well. I do find and I found this when I first started thinking about archaeology and gaming. I started writing about it back in 2013, but I've been thinking about it since I was playing World of Warcraft, starting back in, oh God, probably like 2008, 2009, maybe, where the questions that I'm asking in the real world sometimes don't necessarily apply in a virtual space and vice versa, because we have to take these virtual environments on their own terms, and we understand that they're human made for the time being. By the way, that they're being human made, and the questions that I'm thinking of, had a real bias of being a real world, archaeologist. And I had to kind of separate that part of my brain from the part of my brain that I'm working in a virtual space, because physics work differently. How things manifest themselves visually and with audio, are different as well. And then I started thinking about, looking at video game artifacts, not as artifacts like I'm digging a World of Warcraft, for example, and I'm using the archaeological skill to dig something up. No, not at all. I'm looking for strange things, things that are probably manifested by computer code, that were probably unintended by the designers and developers, that give this game something a little extra than just playing archaeology within a game on the terms and rules of the game itself. I'll call it game jacking, and the fact that I'm not playing the game to play the game. I'm playing the game to study how it was made, how it was built, and also understanding how culture was created. And to see all of that stuff that's going on, these questions, they keep coming up, and they really bother me. And a lot of the other folks who are doing archaeogaming, they bother them too, because the stuff that we see in a virtual space doesn't necessarily translate easily one-to-one into meat space, as it were. And that's a very difficult leap of logic to kind of make and to keep in your mind at all times when you're in that space. Is I'm not dealing with real world physics right now, or real world culture. This is something else.
No. Well, I suppose, and this is where I got very excited after a little while of thinking about this stuff. Is that actually you come to the point with, say, and this is something that you just hinted at, with, say, procedurally generated content. So something which is machine designed and machine made on the fly. You come to the point where actually you will start to see, indeed we are seeing, in a whole new environment, which is in that sense a naturally created world. It's not been designed. And even though in, say, a design world you can find glitches or you can find Easter eggs or whatever, we're on the cusp of needing these tools, I guess, that you're developing to start to think about these new spaces. I mean, could this eventually
Yeah.
actually be some sort of bridging way of thinking about the past,
Right.
using these spaces as in experimental realms, as it were?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's really what I'm after, and what's really been kind of fueling the past couple of years of doing this kind of work is and I'm a big poster boy for the archaeology of No Man's Sky, and there's no secret that I'll be standing online to get the game, or waiting in the queue to download the game whenever it's finally ready. Hurry up, Hello Games, if you're watching this, hurry the fuck up because I want to play.
I'm just imagining you tweeting a picture of you like in a sleeping bag.
Yes,
Day 5.
it could be in my own house, and I'll be wearing the sleeping bag and waiting. It's like, is it ready? Is it ready? Is it ready? But fanboyism aside, the fact that the game is following what I consider to be a deist model of creation. That is to say that you have a prime mover, which is Hello Games, which it puts in the initial code, and then they let it go. And then they see what happens. And they themselves are sending out probes into the universe to find out what they've made. I've gotten some criticism, in the fact of like, why don't you just look at the code, man? Why do you have to go and make this stuff up? Why don't you just look at the code? And I'm like, well, yeah, that'd be cool. If I do, I'll probably have to sign an NDA, and I might not be able to publish. But at the same time, taking a look at that is like looking at epigraphy or paleography for a regular, quote unquote archaeologist. But at the same time, that's going to be part of the equation. But within code, especially complex code that makes rules of action and creation, there's innate complexity, and you get into complexity theory, which is kind of an offshoot of chaos theory in a way, where we don't necessarily understand the complexity of things that we make. And the things that we make have unintended consequences, that are unanticipated by the creator, but they're sure as hell interesting to somebody who's exploring this stuff on those grounds. And so when I talk about machine-created culture, it's starting with the code and then seeing what happens and looking for those unanticipated results that make things really interesting. And to me, that is archaeology.
So it sounds to me as though what you're talking about there is discovery by exploration. It's almost in the spirit of people who were going out into the world back in the early 1900s and trying to understand something that they're observing. Is that what you're getting at?
Sort of, and I'll probably get into trouble, which is okay. I'm used to that. But in the earlier days of archaeology, or looking back in the 1800s and then turn of the century, you've got folks like Schliemann or Arthur Evans or whatever, and they're out traipsing about, and they have this very romantic view of archaeology and history, and they've got their little the copy of the Iliad or whatever, and they're following themselves around and connecting the dots as historians, making stuff up as they go along, which is really kind of the genesis of archaeological method and theories, because people didn't know what they were doing. You've seen the meme of the dog typing at the computer, I don't know what I'm doing. And so this is exactly kind of the same thing, with the beginnings of archaeology. And over time, people realized, well, that was wrong, and here's why, and here's a better way of doing it. And I think that with archaeogaming, we're really at that stage of being circa 1890, with the kind of thinking that we're doing. And first of all, going out and exploring is what makes games fun. It's certainly what makes it fun to me, and that's why I play a game. I'm playing Elder Scrolls Online right now, and I'm level 42. Out of a 50 level cap, and I want to play to get to the level cap so that I don't get my ass kicked by mobs when I'm actually studying something for real. And so I get through the game, and then I go back and I actually go and study. The exploration, it kind of stops at that point, and I say, okay, well, it's time to get serious and do some put on my big boy pants and go do some work. So with that in mind, we're still figuring out what methods to use. We don't really have a toolkit yet that will allow us to do any kind of formal archaeology, whether it's measurements or whatever, for what it is that we're understanding. We just don't know. That'll come. The more people who follow us, and I'm doing it, but there are other people doing it. Dunstan Lowe, for example, Tara Copplestone, Emily Johnson, Sean Graham. uh, uh, her name is Megan. I've forgotten her last name. I'm so sorry, Megan. But you know, all of these folks are kind of, you know, we're not fumbling in the dark, but we're making headway, you know, with our headlamps, you know, basically exploring these caves and trying to figure out a way ahead. So yeah, I'm following. I'm not against applying some good science, and we really haven't we don't have our formal research questions yet. You know, all of us are going into PhDs. You know, granted, I'm an older person, being in my 40s, going back for PhD, but a lot of these other folks are starting to refine what their research questions are, so that when you go into a site, or in this case, when you go into a game that you want to explore in an archaeological way, we have some questions in mind of things that we want to answer. And so we're still figuring out what those questions are. We understand that there's something there, and there's something probably profound in what we're exploring, what we're trying to do. And it's a matter of grasping what that is, and then being able to take that information and that data and then communicate it in a meaningful way.
Okay. So as you say, this whole concept of feeling as though you're in the 1890s, but hopefully not doing a full Schliemann. That should be a thing, doing a Schliemann. But this idea of being in that sort of space, it feels as though what you're trying to, as someone observing what it is that you've been talking about, it feels a little bit as though what you're trying to do is almost like establish a set of parameters and vocabularies which can be used usefully to transfer your observations into and also have them map onto other, you know, real world sites and philosophical, archaeological, historical observations.
Well, that's true. I mean, you know, we're starting with what we know, which is the archaeology of meat space, and you know, all of us have been on excavations, done field schools, taken our coursework, and whatever. It's, you know, it's fine. We take that, and then what can we use from that set, you know, to apply to gaming in an archaeological space, and then vice versa. If there's anything that we can create or figure out in a virtual space that we can apply to, you know, real world archaeology, then great. You know, that's a bonus, and I hope that we are able to find some tools and materials, you know, whether it's everything from documentation to actual excavation, you know, that we can apply. And then, you know, taking, you know, things like a Harris matrix in the real world excavation, what does that translate into in a virtual space? How do we do it? Is it necessary? Then you know, these are things that we need to ask as we kind of find our way forward with this subdiscipline.
And I suppose in that sense, that possibly, coming back to my initial concerns when I first heard about this stuff, that possibly actually makes it an advantage that you can talk to the creators of these initial spaces. So, for example, whoever designed Skyrim, because you're able to compare your observations with actual facts, whereas actually that's an advantage on real-world archaeology. Whereas we sort of go, well, we assume we were right.
Well, that's true. You know, some people are like, "That's cheating." You know, being able to ask somebody, that's totally cheating. I'm like, you know what? Any archaeologist would do that if we were back digging in you know, 4th, 5th century BC Athens or something. Yeah, you bet we would be asking these kinds of questions too. Of course.
Exactly. It's not like you're going to go la 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 la. You know, when you see a Roman walking past.
But also understand that the answers that we would get from developers, and first of all, getting in touch with developers is hard. It is super difficult. So it's like they're not even there sometimes. And so yeah, I mean, people are like, ask the developer. I'm like, no, it's really tough, and you know, they don't write back, and sometimes they do. Hello Games wrote back, and that was awesome. You know, it's like, really? You have 10 people on staff. What are you doing writing to me when you're making the most anticipated game in the history of games? And I thought that was really awesome. You know, so good work, guys. You know, meanwhile, I'm not getting time of day. I'm not getting the time of day from Blizzard or Bethesda or ZeniMax or whatever. You know, oh well. I'm going to start drawing my own conclusions. And if they happen to see this or hear this or whatever, then they can get in touch and saying you're way off base, or here's what we thought, or whatever. You know, so much the better. And even if you do make contact with the developer, what they tell you is not necessarily going to be 100%, you know, fact or truth or whatever. They're speaking through their own filter. They're telling you what they think either A, you want to know, or B, what they have time to tell. and that could be borne out by the evidence that you're finding in the games or not. So being able to talk is just part of what you're doing. It's not going to answer all of the questions 100%. You still need to go out and do the work. You still need to look at the stuff.
Okay, and I guess actually that's possibly where being able to interview these people, potentially if they ever get back in touch with you, is precisely the same as the advantage, inverted commas, that historians claim, where actually you're talking to someone and it just is in the same way that maybe say a document that tells you how much of something was being stored in a certain room could be doctored because someone's on the take. Someone writing, I'm not saying that the game that these developers are on the take, but they will have reasons and a face that they want to put forward, which is about the company, and therefore you're not always going to get the
Yeah, I mean, think about the traveler Pausanias, going around and looking at Greek sites and everything, and the people who are there, they're telling him stories, and we read Pausanias, and we're like, well, that temple's not there, or this temple is confused with this other temple and stuff, and he was there talking to the guys, and so that's just a case in point that we have ancient sources talking to ancient sources, and they're still getting it wrong. So chances are, if we do that now, we'll probably still get it wrong. We might be a little less wrong, but at the same time, nothing's changed. 2,000 years, nothing's changed. No, we think it is, but no.
No. I completely agree. Yeah, just look at the internet. Well, the comments sections, anyway.
Yeah. Well, the internet feeds itself. And you can read that stuff and decide to engage or not, and at least with the comments that were coming from the motherboard stuff and the Kotaku arguments from a couple of weeks ago, it actually wasn't trolling, which I thought was really great, and I was relieved to actually read it. People are actually asking questions like, what is archaeology? Is this archaeology? And that's a really rewarding conversation to see happening by folks who are not archaeologists. That it's cool that there's this kind of passion about what we do, and so no, it was good to see. But yeah, it's the internet.
Well, if you are finding yourself actually in a position where people are asking you very very openly and very honestly, what is archaeology and this kind of thing, I suppose what is your advice to people who want to be archaeologists? Because it sounds as though you're not just a digger. Because obviously you're not. So what is your advice?
Well, I would say be as much of a generalist as you can. I mean, you can specialize. I mean, you're going to find something that really interests you, and probably over time. I've been an archaeologist since, I don't know, I started my studies in 1990, and I still have a vested interest in archaeology. Obviously. So over every 5 years, I find something that's new and interesting to me, and it doesn't have to be new and interesting to somebody else, but to me, it's cool. And so you take that passion, and you take that love, and you take that genuine curiosity, and you just chase the rabbit. It's like, okay, we're gonna take the blue pill, and we're gonna go have a good time. We're gonna figure this out, or not. And follow it for as well as it leads. So be open to possibility. Be a generalist. And the other advice I would give is to expand your network and to join Twitter. There's a robust community of archaeologists who have this constant, amazing conversation ongoing day in, day out, and this is why I like having friends in the EU and the UK and Asia and Australia and New Zealand and the United States and Canada as well, and every space in between, is because it's a 24/7 news cycle on archaeology, and there's always a conversation going on, and you build those contacts, and all of a sudden you can put a question out into the void, and people will go in and they'll give you an answer, and if they ask questions, you can help them. So build that network, make yourself available, for excavation, for study, for reviewing people's papers and all of the stuff, to be as open as you possibly can with your work, and to share as much as you can of yourself, then, so much the better. I think that would be true for any discipline, but archaeology especially. I mean, we're kind of a small group. I think we'd like to be a bigger group, and by making things available to the public, by being free with your research, and by openly communicating, with your colleagues and keeping an open mind about things, I think, all of those are going to serve you well in whatever field you choose, but archaeology specifically.
Okay, okay. Now you talk a little bit about reaching out to other archaeologists and the fact that actually
Sure.
we are in this world now where we can have this constant conversation. In fact, sometimes I have to turn my phone off because of the amount of conversation that's happening. But
Yeah.
what this is very much part of the development of archaeology, and so is the idea of, for example, going into other realms, as it were, cyber realms or whatever. What challenges do you think are facing archaeology in the years to come? Do you think that there are some specific? I mean, apart from saying monetary challenges, everyone talks about money, but
Yeah, well, funding is a bitch. It will always be so. Um, I think I think that the challenges to archaeology are you know people would like to think that we need to keep proving our relevance or why do we matter or whatever. But then we see what's going on in Syria, for example, and it's obvious that archaeology matters in a very big way, and not just in a political way, but we're dealing with global heritage in this case. Even if we're working at something on a site that nobody really seems to care about, that's all contributing to a bigger picture about culture and history. Um, the biggest challenge, I guess, is disseminating the work. We deal with paywalls with publications. We deal with professional publications written for other professionals to use, which is fine. But it's important to not leave the public behind. There are a number of people who are working with public archaeology and who are working with getting the word out and with involving the public in projects and things like that. I'm thinking of Lorna Richardson in particular. With her work that she's done with public archaeology and outreach and internet communication. This is mandatory. Anybody who's doing any kind of excavation or any kind of archaeological work really owes it to the discipline and to themselves and to the public to explain what they're doing and why and what they found and what does this mean. And this ties back into punk archaeology as well, where punk archaeology is getting out there and hoping to involve or at least communicate with the public as things are happening, on the ground with whatever project it is that we're doing, to engage with volunteers, to volunteer ourselves, and to make this as accessible as possible. I think when folks think of archaeology, sometimes they think of the ivory tower, they think it's an elite society or something like that. It's clearly not, and I'm sorry that it does have that reputation. I think we're trying to change it, and by to affect that change, we have to publish more quickly, publish better, and to a wider audience. Both for our professional colleagues, but also especially for anybody who cares. And that's the immediate challenge, and I think that's something that we're trying to address now and in a very real way.
Okay. Well, thank you. And actually, that's a really interesting answer to that question, because as you say, it's tempting to look inwards and think about the survival of our, when's my next funding going to come from? But actually, the communicating more effectively will have the knock-on effect that we all want anyway, in terms of relevance and funding. But the power of actually just talking to people who traditionally haven't been engaged and haven't been talked to is absolutely okay. Okay, well, it sounds as though again you're a busy man, and I'm more than happy to let you go now. You've served your time, but
This was fun.
But I suppose two things. First of all, I would love to hear more from you when you have your research questions coming together. So, would you like to come back sometime and talk about that?
Yes, certainly.
Okay.
And if it would be great to have a roundtable with some of these other folks who are doing what I'm doing, or I'm doing what they're doing, so that we can discuss this as a group. But definitely get back in touch.
Excellent. Okay. And finally, I suppose, do you have any immediate future plans? I mean, what's on the horizon for you?
Well, I guess there's so many things. The first thing to do is I'm currently writing a manuscript with two of my colleagues, Richard Rothfuss and Bill Caraher, called Digging Atari, which is under contract from Left Coast Press. which is using the Atari excavation as a narrative to understand archaeology of the recent past and what that is. And so we're finishing the we're writing the manuscript. Hopefully we'll have that finished and it'll be published at the end of 2016 or sometime in 2017. So that's big. The Punk Archaeology stuff, one of the projects that really interests me right now, and I hope to kick that off soon, is something I'm calling NYC Punk, which is basically going around to these old venues, squatter houses, and places in Manhattan, and then maybe branching out to the other boroughs, to photograph what these old clubs what they are now, compare them to what they used to be, and to talk to people who are living in these spaces or who have shops in these spaces now, like in CBGB's, for example, to see if they actually know where they're working and what used to be there. And I think that'll be a really interesting part of punk history and punk archaeology for us. As far as archeogaming, No Man's Sky, they keep pushing the date back, so maybe it'll be end of this year, maybe it'll be beginning of next year. But as soon as that game comes out, I'm going to disappear for a while, and I will be in that world. If you want to find me, good luck. And hopefully, when I get to the other side, wherever that might be, which is going to be impossible, I'll have something that I am hoping will be, like that holy shit moment, that mind-blowing moment where I can just, put that out there and like, look, this is what happened, this is what's going on, and isn't it wonderful or amazing? Or I might be totally disappointed. I don't know, but it's really exciting to think about. So yeah, those are, we got the book, we've got the punk project and this archaeogaming project as well. So yeah, there's never a dull moment.
Little things.
Yeah.
There's no massive philosophical questions are going on there at all. No, okay. Well, excellent. I mean, all that sounds very exciting, and actually, I really look forward to reading that book when it comes out.
Thanks.
Actually, I think I will. Yeah. As I said to you before we started recording, I watched that documentary about 5 times now.
I'll admit to doing about the same. It's fun. It's really interesting. I don't watch it to watch myself. I watch it because it's an interesting story, and there's just such a lot there. It's cool, and I don't know if there's ever a DVD that's going to come out, but they interviewed the archaeological team every day after the work shut down. We got to sit with Major Nelson, for example, or we got to sit with Zach Penn or some of the cameramen, and they would film us and they'd ask us questions about archaeology. And so where those hours of footage are, I don't know, but they're there. They're in some vault somewhere, but that would be really cool to get a hold of and to watch.
Yeah, we've got to push for a hard copy. Definitely.
Yes, I would love a transcript and a hard copy of the disc as well. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. And actually, at some point, I would love to talk to you about actually the fact that actually we have a hard enough time keeping stuff in meat space, never mind other spaces. But that's a whole other video. We'll have to talk about that some other time. But thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Sure. It's been a real pleasure, and hopefully there are some people out there who have been converted to this archaeogaming, because I know I'm definitely very interested.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot. If they are, great. If not, there's plenty of other archaeology to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a broad church. Wonderful. Yes. Again, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Sure, thanks a lot. Bye, Mark.